We're recording, so over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you showing up here today. Unfortunately, we have to do this virtually, but I'm going to try and make it as interactive as possible. As Susan mentioned, my audio is unstable today, my internet. In San Diego, where I'm at, there are a lot of children that still are homeschooled, and I live in a neighborhood with a lot of children, so they like to suck all the internet juice during school hours. So if it turns into an issue, I will stop my video, which is unfortunate because I know I'd like to see your reactions and myself as well. So if there is a delay, that's what it's from. So thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about leadership development, emotional intelligence, and personality type, very specifically about how do you as an individual show up, and how is the intersection of personality type and emotional intelligence integrate to paint a bigger picture of what that might look like for individuals. So I first learned of emotional intelligence years ago. I've been using MBTI and I'm a master practitioner in that. I've been using that for, I don't want to date myself, but over 15 years. And I learned emotional intelligence from this individual on the screen, Dr. Rich Hanley. One of the things that I appreciated about the way that he described emotional intelligence, but also described the intersection with leadership, is he said, leadership is the art of influence. It's really about how you influence people to get stuff done. Oftentimes people see it as the carrot or the stick. I am managing people. I am telling them what to do, authority. What Dr. Hanley was talking about was, how do I get people to do different things or follow me based on emotional intelligence, vision, influence? What does that look like? So the first activity we're going to do is really something I'm going to ask of you. What makes a great leader? So hopefully you have something handy and you can take some notes. What I wanted to ask of you is to think of a leader that you have worked with before, or someone that you want to work with. Write down 1 to 3 characteristics that you most admire about them. And then we're going to categorize them into one of the 3 areas. So first, the first category is about cognitive skills or thinking ability. It has things to do with memory, logic, learning new things. The second category is job specific or technical expertise. Maybe they're very good with PowerPoint or financial acumen. Maybe they're a fantastic juggler. What does that look like? The third category is soft skills, or what we call emotional intelligence. That might be a characteristic like visionary, resilient, they're positive, or they have a lot of empathy. So go ahead, I'm going to give you a minute, write down 1 to 3 characteristics, and then put them into one of the 3 categories as to where you think they fall. Now what I'd like you to do is we're going to use the whiteboard feature. Chat function gets really messy because you can't see everybody. So what I'm going to have you do, and I'm going to open it in just a second, on the whiteboard, I want you to pick just one of the top characteristics. So out of the 3, pick your one. If you can't pick one, that's okay. You can pick one of 2, but pick one that is a must-have in your opinion. Like, I will not follow a leader if they don't have empathy. And I'm going to ask a couple of you to share your why. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the whiteboard feature for you. And go ahead and write down your top characteristic and be prepared to share your why. So go ahead, write down what you think that might be. And then I'm going to call on a couple people to share.
If you're not sure how to use the whiteboard, you go into View Options. There's an annotate function. I don't know why they just don't write notes. And then on the annotate function, you should get a black bar. And the best one to use is the T for text, which will give you a text box. You just type in that text box and it shows on the whiteboard. If any of you can't work out quite the whiteboard, you can always just pop your ideas into chat.
Sorry, I'm late again. Laura, can you repeat what we're supposed to do?
So think of 1 to 3 characteristics that you want out of a leader. So is it inspirational, authentic, they trust me? And then write maybe 1 or 2 up on the whiteboard.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ooh. Oh, there it is. Okay, good.
Yep, I see it. Wonderful. So a couple of you chose authenticity. I would love to hear a little bit of what do you mean about authenticity? So who'd like to share on what that means? Unfortunately, I can't see who wrote it.
Well, hi, I'm Carmel. I wrote it because for me, it's about being the real you. And I guess it's linked to walking your talk. So it's being natural, being who you really are.
And Laura,
Great.
Jean-Luc and Jane Kesey wrote ability to balance competency and humility in the chat, in case it didn't show up on there, and walk the talk, funny enough, just like we just heard.
Perfect. Thank you, Susan. What about inspirational? Tell me a little bit about why inspirational resonates with you as a top characteristic of a leader. So who shared that?
Actually, it was me again. Sorry to monopolize the airtime. For me, it was about having a strong vision and really getting people on board.
Great, thank you. Okay. What about I respect his competence?
That was me. INTP, that's probably a typical INTP sort of comment. But yeah, I mean, my 2 comments, so the other one was trusted me. They were both with one particular person in mind. And the most important thing was that he trusted me. He let me get on with things. But also I respected his competence. I knew he knew his stuff. It was something to do with that. I had previously worked for somebody else who I had no respect for because I don't think he just wasn't very well competent. He was all show and no substance, in my opinion, that particular person. So this other person who did seem competent and did seem that he knew what he was doing and he understood things, that was really important for me.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So what I'm hearing here, we've got competency, humility, ability to balance between the 2, authenticity, trust, ethics, vision, inspirational. All of these, if you were, and I'm going to go ahead and go back to sharing here. All of these, if you were to think about how they show up as a leader, what I'm seeing is most of what you shared falls into the soft skills bucket, right? You're not asking about their memory or their logic or can they juggle. You're really looking at, are they visionary? Are they competent? Are they inspirational, right? So those are the pieces that I'm seeing more so when we talk about leadership development. So how I've linked leadership development with emotional intelligence is what we're going to talk about today. And how does emotional intelligence show up differently with different personality types? So the first example I want to give is an individual that I was working with. Now, he was, for your information, an ISTJ. So his preferences were introverted thinking and extroverted sensing in his top 2. Now, he was going through a leadership development program that I was putting him through. And when he used his emotional intelligence assessment, we used the EQI 2.0, and we'll talk more about that model in just a minute. Surprisingly enough, as an ESTJ, he rated lower in things like interpersonal relationships, He had very high problem solving and very high decision making and high independence. So he was what we would call a lone wolf. Oftentimes he would sit in his room and he would have people come in, he would solve their problems and they would go on their merry way. When he got his 360 back, people said he wasn't an inspirational leader, he was a manager. And he was very upset by this. And so we had a conversation to look at his ISTJ, how he was showing up, but also his emotional intelligence. He was very good at the introverted thinking, which was the critiquing, the logical questioning, the understanding, the digging deeper, the competence piece. And then he was also using the information in the moment, his extroverted sensing, on facts and urgency for action, really having them come in almost like a deli counter where they would pick a number, they would come in, he would solve, they would move on. So what was happening is that because of this situation, people didn't see him as visionary. He just solved my problems. I know that Joe will take care of it. So I'm going to go to Joe and say, hey, Joe, here's my problem, solve it. Instead of to come with their own ideas for a solution. So once we had this conversation and he noticed it was an interpersonal relationship thing, and it was also about balancing his problem solving. One of the questions that he chose to use that resonated with him was, if I wasn't here, I'm curious, how would you solve this problem? At first, those that worked with him were shocked. I'm not here to solve. This is your job, Joe. You're here to tell me what to do. So it took a little for them to get used to him asking that question about, how would you do this if I wasn't here? So we talked more about increasing his interpersonal relationships, how to build trust, how to be inspirational, how to empower his employees to solve their own problems, and instead of him just being that deli counter and solving it for them. Okay. Another example of a leader that I worked with regarding emotional intelligence and personality type was a senior executive that sat on a board of directors. Now, his type preferences really were along the intuitive, extroverted intuition and introverted intuition. So he was very big picture oriented. What is 5 years from now going to look like? When he sat on this board of directors, oftentimes every week, they would look at KPIs, which they called key performance indicators. And they would look on a week-to-week basis of what has and hasn't changed within the organization, which was looking more about extroverted sensing and introverted sensing of the data in the moment or data in the past to make decisions going forward. Now, what was happening was they were looking at such a myopic view of everything. He came in and said, what about 5 years from now? What is the trend year over year? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Do we want to grow in this side of the organization? Do we want to have more people? Do we want to double size? What does that look like for our revenue? And at first, people were a little concerned with, wait a minute, we're looking at the here and now. But when he had them start looking at trends, they noticed looking week by week was myopic, and it wasn't helping them get to their bigger picture strategy. So his strength, which was different from everybody else in the group, of intuition, allowed them to go, wait a minute, you are now the go-to guy, right? You are the one that we want to go to for our future looking. So he built rapport and trust with the team by challenging their vision, challenging how they saw stuff, challenging them, but doing it in an emotionally intelligent way, making sure he was not stressing them out, but doing it in a way that was building rapport first, then started challenging them in their bigger picture vision. So let's talk a little bit about what emotional intelligence is. This is the textbook definition of emotional intelligence. It's the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, but also those around you. So when you have high degree of emotional intelligence, I know what I'm feeling. I know what my emotions mean, but I also know how is it affecting other individuals. So there are 2 studies done, one by Wagner in 97 and one by Ruven Baran in 98, looking at the prediction of success in the workplace using IQ versus EQ. And I give this presentation quite a bit to science fields or academia. And of course I ask them, what do you think is the predictor of success in a percentage for IQ? 99, 85, they rarely go less than 50%. So I quite shock them when I say it actually only amounts to 6%. They only found 6% of success in the workplace was just how smart you are as an individual. So I asked the same question. Now let's think about emotional intelligence in the workplace. How much a predictor of success is that? And oftentimes they're shocked to find out that it's anywhere from 27 to 45%. So where I go with this is if you have the ability to be more successful in the workplace, 4 to 6 times more, why not have IQ and EQ? I work a lot with mental health companies. And one of the companies I work with right now, I relate the example to, think about it as a surgeon, as a neurosurgeon. Yes, I want the individual that goes into my brain to do the operation to be very competent. I want them to know what they're doing. I don't want this to be their first brain surgery, right? I want them to understand. I also want them to have bedside manner. I want them to have reality testing of, you know what, here's your actual ability on if this is going to work or not. I want them to have stress tolerance. If they go in and they see something else wrong that wasn't there individually or at the beginning, I want them to have flexibility to, in the moment, make those decisions and pivot. I also want them to be able to have empathy and talk to my family about how did the surgery go? What are the chances? So when you think about what you want out of a leader, I want somebody that has both cognitive ability with IQ, but I also want them to have emotional intelligence as well. So I'm going to do a brief overview of the EQ model to give you some insights. Now, there are 15 different subscales. We only have an hour. We're not going to get through them. So I'm going to narrow down which ones we will go through in just a minute, and we're going to cover some of them. In the handouts that you all have, you have the model, and it's going to define every single subscale in there for your reference. So when we look at the EQ model, I liken it to a hub and spoke model. It's a holistic model. If you notice, there's movement. It's not static. When I talk about the hub and spoke model, I talk about balance. I talk about if you were on a bike, to think of the hub as the center of emotional intelligence, and the spokes are the 15 subscales coming off of it. If you were to bend or break any one of those, the tire will now wobble, or it might break in and of itself, and now you have to walk it up the hill. That's similar to how I describe the EQ model. Any of them are interdependent upon each other. When I talk through the model, it's interesting because there are 5 composites. The first composite is self-perception. This is about how we see ourselves, our inner self. It has things like confidence, that we are a good person, that we have good understanding of our emotions. What am I feeling? Why am I being triggered? It also has things like, I'm a lifelong learner. I have goals that I'm setting and making for myself that are realistic. Self-expression is the first part of what people start to see. This is things like, how do I emote? Am I stoic? Am I happy? Do I blow up? Am I overly assertive, borderline aggressive? What does that look like? The next one is interpersonal. It's about developing and maintaining social relationships. You guys talked about authenticity. How do I show up? Trust, congruence, right? Inspirational. Do I trust people as much as they trust me? Is it a two-way street? Is it reciprocal? Also, it's about empathy, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, asking how you can support someone else. The next one is decision-making. When I first promoted this model and I was working with an engineering consulting firm, so these are PhDs in hydrology, they are people working on infrastructure, architects, very science-oriented. They thought emotional intelligence was touchy-feely. They thought we were going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and talk about our feelings. As an ESTJ, you might notice that's probably not my forte. And I asked the question of, who here has made a decision void of emotions? And I had an individual raise his hand and say, oh, yeah, what I had for dinner last night, didn't use any emotion with that. I said, that's interesting. Tell me more. Were you hungry when you were making that decision? Yeah, I was starving. I just got off a long day of work and I was starving. And I said, so would you say that hunger had driven you to make a decision on what you were going to eat? If you were starving, you might have gone something for quick or easy, or did it make you go for junk food? And he goes, yeah, you're absolutely right. I also was stressed. So when we talk about decision making, we are using the emotions that we have, that we are feeling, that we are either in touch with or potentially not in touch with, in an effective and meaningful way. How am I solving this problem? Am I using logic? Am I using how it's going to affect other people? What does that look like? Am I being impulsive? Am I going to go straight for the Cheetos or for the chocolate because I had a stressful day when I'm eating? And then the last one is about stress management. This is, how do we cope with challenges? How do we deal with resiliency? What I've noticed with COVID, because I get this question quite a bit, how has COVID affected people's EQ? And I say it has to do a lot with stress. It has to do with flexibility. Are you ebbing and flowing? How are you taking in the information? Because I'm working with a mental health company. One day they were allowed to have groups of 250. Within 24 hours, they were now to groups to 10. And they were doing in treatment, which were groups of 20. Now they had to double their staff like that. How flexible and resilient were they with that? And then also, how optimistic are you about the future? So that's a quick, brief overview of the model of emotional intelligence. So when I talk about emotional intelligence, I talk about leadership presence. This is about how you show up. I'm only going to do a couple of the subscales that I think fit with leadership presence. Otherwise, like I said, we'd be here for much longer than an hour, and I'll stay after for questions as well. As we go through this, I would love to challenge you to say, how do you show up? Do I rate myself high in this? Or is it a little bit low based on the characteristics? Or it might be something that I maybe am high and out of balance. Maybe I have too much of a good thing. So what I decided as the three main attributes of a leader when I talk about leadership presence is, the first one is vision. How do I build this long-term view with others? The subscales that I associated with vision, and I would love to have a robust discussion about the others that could fit in as well. Self-regard. How do I respect myself? What is my confidence? I want to follow a leader that says, yes, we are going to double in 5 years. We are going to do this. We are going to hit this financial marker. I also want somebody that has self-actualization, self-improvement, pursuit of meaning, goal setting. Also optimism. Somebody that's like, yes, we are going to do this. We're in this together. That adversity and the way that they are optimistic are ways that I attribute to vision. And we're going to go into each of the subscales in just a minute. The second one is connection. Connection is all about, how do I connect with people? How do I engage and inspire others? You guys mentioned in your top characteristics, inspirational, authenticity. How do I as an individual show up? So interpersonal relationships. Am I trusting you? And am I vulnerable with you? And are you vulnerable with me? Can I talk to you about anything? Am I easy to approach? What does that look like? Empathy, putting yourself in other people's shoes, being aware, understanding, appreciating how they feel. And then the third attribute I relate to, execution, actually getting the work done. How do I hold people accountable? And that I relate to impulse control. Am I going to make rash, quick decisions? Am I going to speak out of turn? Am I going to interrupt people? Or am I going to really think about how is this going to affect the collective? Am I going to ask for everybody's opinion? Collaboration. And then also stress tolerance. When I'm under duress, do I fly off the handle? Do I think in a very linear way, or do I do introverted feeling and I take all the criticism onto myself, right? So what and how do you deal with stress without what we call falling apart? So what we're going to do now is go into each one of the subscales, and I'm going to do a definition of them. What does it look like when it's mid to high? What does it look like when it's high and unbalanced? Again, that broken hub and spoke model. And then what it looks like when it might be low. Feel free to rate yourself, because it is a self-assessment on where you think you fall. So let's start with vision. When we look at self-regard, here's what self-regard might look, sound, or feel like. So when you have good self-regard, it's self-acceptance. I'm confident. I'm aware of my strengths, but also aware of my weaknesses. Like myself, I know I'm not the most empathetic person. So every day I practice my empathy. I ask people, how can I support you? What do you need from me? And it's very helpful in the way that I coach, because people think that I'm very empathetic because I have that confidence to ask. I'm not naturally good at empathy, so how am I going to be able to help you with this? Lower self-regard might be insecure or lower self-esteem. Now, high and unbalanced self-regard, and I'm sure you're thinking of somebody that may not have been a leader, might have been more of a manager in your life, could be arrogant or a narcissist or overly confident, somebody that says, I don't need your feedback, I'm good how I am. The next one is self-actualization. This is about goal setting, driving towards ongoing self-improvement, being a lifelong learner. I'm motivated to be my best more often. And how do I get there? What are my goals? Now, lower self-actualization might not set very challenging goals. They might be an underperformer. So if you're working with somebody that maybe doesn't set challenging goals, it might be about their own self-actualization and how can you help them make goals and incremental progress for positive improvement. Now, too much self-actualization can get into the overly goal-driven. I did this, check, what's next? I did this, check, what's next? A know-it-all, or could potentially burn out because you're taking on others' work or responsibility. I wrote perfectionist down here because that's something that I have a tendency to do. When is 80% good enough? Or does it have to be 100% perfect in order for me to move on? So go ahead and rate yourself on where you think you fall for self-actualization. The next one is optimism. Optimism is all about having a positive attitude during adversity. Wow, COVID. COVID really showed a lot of people's optimism and resiliency, but it also showed how do you become more optimistic when given a situation that maybe isn't most ideal for you. When you think about positive and negative, the ratio is 3 to 1. For every one negative idea, thought, words that you use, the balance for that is 3 positives. So if you think about a jar, every time you say something negative, you need to put 3 into the positive jar in order to balance them out. So when you think about optimism, think about inspiration. Am I hopeful and confident about the future? I want a leader that's like, yes, we are going to make it. We are going to do this. Versus somebody that says, yeah, so we have this new project. I don't think it's going to work, but we have to do it. That doesn't inspire me. That doesn't make me want to work towards that project. Now, too much optimism can also be a negative in the sense of when it's overbalanced, it could be seen as an overly rosy colored view of the world. Everything is sunshine and unicorns and cupcakes, right? Sometimes if they're too optimistic, it might not appear that they understand the seriousness of the situation and can be seen as unrealistic. And we've all dealt with those leaders that maybe are too pie in the sky and it's not realistic. Okay, so go ahead and put where you think you fall on your own optimism. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at connection. So connection is about actively engaging and inspiring other individuals. When we look at this, we're going to look at interpersonal relationships and empathy. So let's look at interpersonal first. Interpersonal relationships is about connecting with people, maintaining relationships, feeling at ease in social situations. Now, I'm sure with your type knowledge, you're probably already thinking in your mind, how might this relate to type? Interpersonal relationships, is this an extroverted function? Is this an F function, right? What does that look like for you? Now, lower interpersonal relationships are those that might be a little bit more withdrawn or unfriendly or be seen as a loner and doing their own thing. Now, too much interpersonal relationships is those individuals that I value so much what Susan thinks of me, I may not want to give her harsh criticism. I don't want to hurt her feelings, so I'm going to protect that relationship with her. Maybe it's unwillingness or inability to be alone, always wanting to be around other people to feel validated or self-worth. And also those that have very high interpersonal might socialize more than they're at work. I know when I was working at an organization, people would say, well, I think Laura's here, her laptop's open, but in the morning, I love to say good morning to people. I like to have conversations. How was your weekend? And so that socialization needs to be balanced with actually getting work done. Okay, so go ahead and note where you think you fall in your own interpersonal relationships. The next one is empathy. Empathy is about really putting yourself in other people's shoes and being attuned to what they need. Really being able to anticipate their reaction. Oh, they're not going to like this idea, or they're not going to like this new nursing schedule I put out, or they're not going to like these new benefits that we're rolling out in HR, right? So what does that look like? Putting yourself in other people's shoes. Not enough empathy can be seen as selfish. Again, being more myopic on like, what do I need? Which could be an inattention to other people's feelings, or really just having difficulty relating to other people. Now, the flip side of that, when there's too much empathy and it's overbalanced, is I'm concerned with helping everybody else that I don't help myself. When I work with this mental health company, a lot of their therapists, I call it gas mask. You know, when you're on a plane and they say, make sure you put your mask on you first before you can help other people. With this field of healthcare workers, what I'm noticing is they're helping everybody else so much that they're drained. They don't have anything left in the tank for themselves. So their overuse of empathy is actually harming them in terms of their own rejuvenation. This might be holding back the truth because I'm afraid it might hurt your feelings. And sometimes it's really hard to stay objective because I'm concerned about everybody else's well-being. So think about where you fall in your own empathy, and also start to think, does it have something to do with your personality type? What might that look like for you? The last attribute that we're going to look at is execution. Again, this is about getting stuff done and holding people accountable. So with that, let's talk about impulse control. We all know somebody who's high and unbalanced in impulse control, where they maybe don't react quick enough. Maybe they're stalling. They're waiting for everybody to maybe make the decision. Maybe they're waiting for collaboration, or they're waiting for more detail, analysis paralysis. I need more data. I can't make this decision yet. Now, when you're balanced or mid to high in impulse control, you're composed. You maybe have a high tolerance for frustration. You know when to react and when not to react. Now, low impulse control, these are the individuals where it's like, I don't know what I'm going to get from Laura today. Is she going to be in a good mood? Is she going to be in a bad mood? Is she going to ask me a question and then interrupt me? Is she explosive and unpredictable, right? What does that look like? Okay. So think of, again, personality type. How might impulse control relate to the different functions? The last one is stress tolerance. So when we look at stress tolerance, it's all about how do I sit in times of crisis or challenge or stress, or even sometimes change, because change can be stressful for a lot of people. When you have good stress tolerance, you have effective coping mechanisms. You rejuvenate, you take the time to be stable and relaxed. Maybe when challenges happen, they're exciting for you. Or maybe when challenges happen, you sit in the moment, you're grounded. Now, low stress tolerance is pretty obvious. It's easily shaken. They have high anxiety levels. Maybe they don't know how to react, so they're reactive, or they do nothing. Now, when you look at high and unbalanced stress tolerance, because people always ask, why would it ever be bad to be very high in stress tolerance? So, well, if you're so stoic, you might appear dismissive. You might take on other people's work because you said, you know what, if it's maybe you have really high stress tolerance and high interpersonal relationships, and you say, you know what, I just assigned this work to a bunch of people, but they're so busy. These nurses are so busy on the front line. I'm just going to go take care of it myself. Sometimes that's taking on too much for yourself and can lead to burnout. Now, being stoic can be, maybe Laura doesn't appear to understand the seriousness of the situation. If I come across like it's no big deal. If you come to me and the sky is falling and you're upset and something's really bothering you, and I show no emotion, maybe I have really high stress tolerance and low emotional expression, I don't emote. I just sit there and I'm straight-faced. Well, does Laura understand what's going on? She doesn't seem to care. I don't trust her. So as a leader, having too much stress tolerance can also not be beneficial. So again, think of where you fall on your own stress tolerance, but then also how might it relate to your personality type? So I'm going to pause here for one moment and just see if there are any questions so far. I know we didn't go through all of the 15 subscales due to time, but I wanted to see, as we get into EQ and personality type, have you noticed anything that you'd like to share? We can share in chat, or you can share, raise your hand, or speak up. Have you noticed anything about emotional intelligence and maybe your own personality type? Jane, ability to balance competency and humility. That was the last one. Okay, great. Great. I love the point of how overusing these gets you in trouble, as in stress tolerance. Wonderful. Has anybody had an example of how maybe they didn't deal with stress with COVID that they relate back to maybe their own EQ or their own personality type? As an INTJ, any EI that I have has had to be developed. If you think I'm not there now, you've shown me in the past. Thanks, Angelina, appreciate that. Yes, as an ESTJ, probably not shocking to a lot of you, my empathy, as I mentioned, has been a lot lower. One of the things as an ESTJ that is very high for me is problem solving. I'll give you an example of me in the moment going, oh, I got to develop this empathy real fast. I have a very good friend. She's an empath, very different from me. Lovely friend. I love having conversations with her because her point of view is very different from mine. And one time she came to me, we were on a walk, and she just starts ranting about her job. And about 20 minutes in, I'm like, holy crap. Okay. So I stopped her and I said, hey, Sarah, I would love to help you update your resume. Sounds like you don't like, I'll be a reference for you. Like, what kind of job are you looking for? And she looked at me and said, I love my job. I was just venting. And I went straight to problem solving. I was literally listening to Sarah vent, trying to solve her problem, not empathy, not active listening, not trying to seek to understand. I was asking to find her a better job. I was trying to solve her problem. So instead, I had to go, oh, okay, sorry, Sarah, I hear you venting a lot about your job. How do you want me to show up and support you? Are you venting, or would you like me to help solve your problem? 90% of the time, they're just venting. They don't need my problem-solving ESTJ hat on. They don't need that. They just want to be heard. I'm listening to solve. They're listening for me to ask engaging, deep questions to be heard more. Jean-Luc, you're sad. The same with my daughter. I'm an INFP and I was in stress, acting probably like an ESTJ. Yes, you and I have a lot in common. My brother is an INFP.
Yeah. And
And-
she told me, I just want to be listened to.
And once she told you that, you said, perfect, that's how I need to show up.
No, I said, shame on me.
Right. So that's about being that EQ, putting that hat on and saying, how can I support you? Yes, Catherine, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's also even people, so INTP, we also want people to show sympathy sometimes. So that was the point I wanted to make really. So my ISTJ husband, when I've got a problem, he does exactly what you just said, which is tries to solve it for me. But actually, I don't want him to solve it because I want to do that myself. I just want sympathy sometimes. So
You
it's
just
sometimes
want
easy to think that Ts or NTs don't need sympathy. We do.
Yes. And I ask people all the time, if you don't know what they need, what do? You ask. It's the simplest thing. Tell me, how can I support you? That has been the #1 best thing that I've learned about emotional intelligence and my own coaching style. How can I support you? It's not about the nail. Yes, that is such a great video about how people don't understand where the other person is coming from unless you ask. So again, YouTube, it's not about the nail. Fantastic video. I use it in a lot of my emotional intelligence training. So thank you about that. So when we think about how you show up as an individual, let's talk about type. Now, I have some slides where I could go into each of the 8 mental functions and talk about that. As type experts in and of yourselves, I'm not going to go through that. So I'm just going to do a quick review of how we look at type using the Pierman Personality Integrator. So with attitude of energy, we have extroversion, introversion, as you all know. You also know that we take about information through sensing or intuitive functions. And you have this in your handout as well. And then also the decision-making on the thinking and feeling components, right? How do we actually move forward into action? So the Pierman Personality Integrator, which goes back to Jungian roots and really looks at the mental function model in this way. So it's a little bit animated. There might be a delay, so I'm going to go pretty slow through it. How Roger Pierman looks at this integration is he first looks at your attitude of energy. Do you have extroverted attitude of energy or is it introverted attitude of energy? He then looks at the perceiving side of things, which we know as sensing and intuition. Right? The sensing side of things is practical, detail-oriented. The intuition, scenarios and themes at the crux of what it is. From there, we also look at the judging side, which is the decision-making functions. We look at, is it logical and organized in a T fashion, or is it values-driven and or diplomatic in a feeling fashion in terms of how we make decisions? Now, adding those extroverted attitudes and introverted attitudes, we look deeper into the 8-function model that Jung had originated, looking at extroverted sensing, looking at extroverted intuition. What might that look like for you? Looking at extroverted thinking, extroverted feeling, what might look like that for you? And then getting into the introverted attitudes as well. What I like about the Pierman Personality Integrator is it talks a lot about natural and demonstrated. I find this really of interest when I do my coaching. As an ESTJ, my dominant function is extroverted thinking. I also type as an ESFJ, although very slight, which would change my dominant function to extroverted feeling. Through stress, I know I am not an extroverted feeler. I am an extroverted thinker in how I deal with things. So in the grip function, and also help with Patrick Kerwin years ago, really helped me define I'm an ESTJ based on how I am in the grip. But interestingly enough, with the Pierman, I do show a lot of extroverted feeling as how I practice. So when he looks at personality type, he says, what's natural for you and what do you demonstrate? How often do you do it? It's very natural for me to be extroverted thinking, that problem solving, being very objective, critiquing, bringing in data and facts and information to get movement, to get decisions done. But in my coaching career, I typically am extroverted feeling. I need to practice empathy. I need to put myself in somebody else's shoes to figure out what support do you need from me. So how I type is actually, my natural is extroverted feeling, or excuse me, extroverted thinking. My demonstrated is extroverted feeling. Now, because of that difference, that is something that de-energizes me, because I have to go outside of the box. And that causes me sometimes stress and duress in how I get exhausted. I had 5 coaching calls yesterday. By the end of the day, I wanted to go into a little hole and not talk to anybody. I went for a run. I had to be by myself. As a very clear extrovert, that's not normal for me. I needed to rejuvenate. So when we think about how do you communicate with people, and we look at your dominant functions, we're really looking at this. And Dick Thompson really helped me with this. He shared this slide with me. Do you focus on what's immediate? Do you identify data patterns? Do you look at and or debate logical consequences? Again, with my girlfriend, I was like, let me tell you, here's what you need to do to get a better job, right? I was all about like, let's do this. Let's move you to something you love, right? Or do you foster connectivity among other people? The other flip side of that is when you're doing introverted sensing, are you reflecting on reliable data? Here's what's happened in the past. How has this worked before? Can we use that construct again? Or am I going to look at possible scenarios, visionary? Am I going to reflect and analyze in the moment what works, what doesn't, that critique? Or am I going to foster alignment with ideals? How does this sit with me? How does this make me feel? So these next slides I'm going to go through, you all know these, so I'm just going to flip through really fast because I think the meat of this presentation is really hearing from you all about how they overlap. In order to do that, I want to go through one more thing which relates to specifically to emotional intelligence, is the Flex Index. So with the Pearman Personality Integrator, not only does it look like at what you do naturally and what's demonstrated, but also how do you flex with agility and resiliency in different ways? And it breaks it down into 5 different areas with this Flex Index. Are you proactive? How is your composure? Do you connect with other people? Do you seek novel and new things with variety? How do you rejuvenate? Do you have good stress tolerance? So when you look at these components together, and you look at how individuals show up. Again, it is a self-assessment. So you look at, how do I show up as a leader? There are 360 components to also see, how do other people see me as a leader? The example I like to give is, I'd show up with not a lot of empathy. But if you ask my clients, they say, actually, Laura's probably one of the most empathetic people I know. That's because I'm demonstrating empathy. I am showing up how my clients need me versus what's natural for me. But what that means is I need a lot of time to rejuvenate. I have to deal with my own coping strategies of being exhausted by showing up in a different way that's natural for me. So here's where I'd like to have the rest of the time is based on your own understanding of your own type, and feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat function. Based on your understanding, opinion, and or experience of the subscales, either the ones we talked about or any of the ones that you have defined in front of you, and looking at the Pearman personality attitudes and the 8 mental functions and the Flex Index, where do you see some overlap? I've done this with a couple of groups before, and being a lover of spreadsheets, I know, shocker, ESTJ, threw them up and said, based on these, where do they fall, and did a spot matrix chart. We can't do that. It's going to bore most of you based on who's in this session, but I'd love to hear from you. How do you see the overlap? One of them that I see obviously is extroversion and assertiveness. People that have more extroversion have a tendency to rate higher on assertiveness because they speak their mind and they might actually talk too much. Or maybe empathy and introversion, or introverted feeling or extroverted feeling. How might those overlap? So I would love to open it up for you and just get some discussion going about what you see or how you as an individual might show up.
Laura, is it worth stopping your slide so that you can see everybody and it creates more of a group discussion?
Perfect. There we go. How about that?
And then you just need to go into gallery, if you go into gallery view for everyone, then you can see everyone. It feels more like we're in a room then having a discussion.
Perfect. So I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts?
Hi.
Hi.
I'm saying on the scales where you're asking us to rate, I had impulse control. I was thinking, well, it depends what's going on really. But then when you got to the bit about frustration, I do get frustrated really easily, and I think that's a bit of an INTJ thing as well. I'm very impatient, particularly when it comes to people issues.
Okay.
But the other things were sort of middle-ish. But I think I've developed a lot. I'm a lot more optimistic than I used to be. I never used to be optimistic, but now I don't know, see how it goes. So, yeah.
Angelina, do you mind if I asked you some follow-up questions?
No, carry on.
So you said you get quite frustrated and have lower patience for people issues. Can you dive a little deeper? Is it issues with relationships with people, or where people are being unjustly, can you tell me a bit more about that?
It's actually in the moment interaction with people. So if they're either missing the point or talking too much, or I don't know, just being annoying, I get quite frustrated. Yeah.
Angelina,
I demonstrate.
how much would you see temperament playing in here? Because I could see temperament having quite a lens on what Angelina just said. And I could see it also in the impulse control for possibly artisans or improvisers.
Yeah, I think in the what's my temperament called again, Susan? God, I should know
Either
this.
rational or theorist, whichever word you prefer, Angelina. Right?
I'm so sorry. Rational theorist. There is that independence thing. Like even in the way you would deal with people, you want them to be competent and independent and not have to keep coming to you for things. So that's another thing that is dependence. I have children, and quite frankly, whenever they need anything from me, it's like, oh, you're so needy. Yeah, so that I think it overlaps quite a lot.
Yeah, one of the comments I would have is on the self-expression, emotional expression and assertiveness. So INTP, those two aspects are more difficult for me, because what I would typically do is keep my emotions to myself until they really take me over, and then they burst out in inappropriate ways is the best way I could describe it.
Right.
So I'm still learning that, and I'm getting on a bit now, but yeah, I still have to get my head around that sometimes. And then I can relate to what Angelina was saying about frustration. You just get very frustrated, and then I get very picky as well, and so on. So I think there's a possible relationship between that self-expression and type, or my type in that case.
Yes,
Catherine. Yeah, Catherine, I'm an INFP, and I've been there for a very long time, because yes, it's feeling, but it's introverted feeling. So it's a feeling towards the inside. So it's there. It's like something that prevents it to get outside.
Yeah, and to your point, I'm working with and coaching a CFO, and he is very introverted, and he's very low on interpersonal and emotional expression. What happens though is when, he's CFO, so he's got to analyze risk. Great personality type for the analyzation of risk within an organization. What happens though, very much like what you mentioned, Catherine, and to your point too, Jean-Luc, is that when he does emote, people are like, whoa, where did that come from? Because it's intense. It's like it's built so much inside of him. And so what we're working on is how can he do small increments of emotional expression and small increments of interpersonal relationships where he's showing up authentic and not fake, right? if you don't care about somebody, you don't want to overly act like you care, because then they'll go, who are you? It's not an authentic leader. And you said authenticity is huge for you, right? So what we're working on with him is, how can he watch his emotions at all times so that he can be aware when he's going to blow up, to tailor them back a little bit and show incremental change. And then also be more vulnerable, because that's something, again, like you mentioned, Jean-Luc, he's doing a lot of the internal feeling. And then when the external comes out, it's very different from what he looks like. Ian, you made a comment about Phiro B, expressed and wanted. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that?
When you were starting to talk a little bit about the directed aspect, and I can't fully remember the conversation, but what was coming out to me there was, and I guess that most people on the call are familiar with Phiro B in terms of the inclusion, etc. But in terms of what is expressed and what is actually wanted to be received, so there can be mixed messages that are sent, that people are not quite on the same wavelength, if you like. So I was wondering, in terms of the linkage with that instrument and some similarities with the Phiro B. That's where I was coming from on that comment.
Great. Thank you. I think you're spot on. As Susan mentioned, there's temperament that could overlap. There's Phiro B that could overlap. Jane, I know you talked about positive intelligence. There's absolutely positive intelligence that overlaps. There's so many theories of that overlap to paint that kind of bigger picture. And I think, Catherine, what you said is spot on. It's about, as a coach, how do you support and challenge and have that balance between the two?
I think the challenge that I had, though, when I was looking at it, was that I couldn't reconcile labels like self-actualization with those, if you like. So what I wanted to pick apart a bit more was, how actually are these terms defined? Because I didn't see personally self-actualization in those terms. So there was a part of me that was sort of going along with it, but internally was sort of resisting that, thinking, hold on a second, what's going on here? That does not compute. But anyway, let me be less bolshy and hand that over to someone else.
Well, Ian, so I'm happy to, and anyone here, I have sample reports that link the emotional intelligence with the pyramid, the 8 mental functions. I have sample reports, and I'll put my email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out, and I would love to have a conversation around how they show up together. I do use those reports with clients to help with both. And sometimes I just do separate reports, but happy to show you what that looked like and dive a little deeper for you, Ian, if that's of interest for you. Who else had something to share? I noticed chats going. Jane, you talked a little bit about being hijacked. Yeah. And how stress is a large factor. Did you want to dive into a little bit more of that?
I was just going to say that being tired can be just as bad as being stressed. And, if there's one thing I've learned, you can be an emotionally intelligent facilitator or coach, and then either, you didn't get the night's sleep you wanted, or something was more exhausting than you thought it was going to be. And suddenly your resource, you have to be really careful, either in the moment or afterward, when you're back with the people whom supposedly you care about the most, and your EQ goes out the window because you used it all up. I mean, I always emphasize that, and I've learned it so much personally, that you don't develop it once and for all. It's not like my intuition. I mean, my intuition can be wrong, but it doesn't disappear like my EQ can.
Yes, absolutely. And to be clear with that. Emotional intelligence is adaptable. It's changeable. It's something that you can learn over time. Like I was mentioning with my empathy, I come across as very empathetic because I work on it every single day. And similar to what you're talking about with stress, you know, I was working with this organization and we had gone through 4 days of EQ. Each day was 8 hours, 4 days over the span of almost a year. Then COVID hit and then they all retested. So I got pre-COVID EQ results and post-COVID EQ results. And people were like, wow, my empathy went way up. My interpersonal kind of sat. I mean, so it was interesting to see how people with the stress of COVID and also during the different times of COVID, when COVID first hit, it was a very different stress to now when things are starting to open up and we have what we call COVID fatigue, which is a whole different level of stress because it's been a chronic stress for over a year. So absolutely it plays into it, and EQ very much is a snapshot in time. So thank you for that, Jane.
Thank you, Laura. Really fascinating. I'm going to pause recording now just for the interest of the recording, and we'll keep the room open for about another 20 minutes before our next session if anyone wants to stay. So I'll just pause, stop